All right, well, welcome back to the first lecture of the next 4 weeks. Then 4 weeks, then 8 weeks. So, how you guys feeling? Pretty good?
Yeah.
All right, so let's see. The things that I didn't cover earlier, well, we covered the syllabus, the use of Canvas, time cards, Aero 200 purpose. How about what am I looking for in lab? See, what is an A quality project? Well, truth be told, everybody here starts with an A in this class, and then you subtract from there. That's kind of how I work it. So what I'm looking for, highest standards. So we're working on an airplane engine. And as far as I'm concerned, and these are, well, not airworthy, we're going to pretend like they're airworthy engines, and they're very close to it. They run, every one of them ran before. That's why there's a logbook. So I can look at who has done what and what kind of quality was before it. And so I expect you to keep the quality up. Not damage the engine. Of course, things are going to happen. And as it is out in the field, if you break something, you make a mistake, what do? You fess up. You got to fess up. And that's an industry standard. If you make a mistake and you fess up, usually it's just, do you understand what you did wrong? Yeah, I understand. Okay, well, let's just not do that anymore, okay? If you cover a mistake, you usually just walked off the job at that point. You're just asked to leave. It's like, well, we can't have somebody working here who's going to cover up mistakes. So if you lock up your tools and go and head on out, here's your last paycheck. So that's, cover something up, and I find that would be a bad thing. But if you make a mistake, that's okay. People are going to make mistakes. We're here to learn off of mistakes, and things are going to break. You are going to strip out some bolts, and I'm just going to ask you what happened. We learn from it and stuff like that. But high standards. I want you to take good care of the parts. Don't let the bearings bang into something else. Don't drop the crankshaft onto something. So everything should be nicely kept. It is a little unnerving when I walk by somebody taking apart an engine and you see parts just piled on top of parts. The bearings are very soft, and they're plain bearings. They're very soft. They scratch really easy, and you have to treat them very carefully. In the field, we would never reuse the bearings. We'd replace them, but you need to take extra care of them and wrap them up, put them away. Don't even look at them real hard. No under or over torques. Well, what do I have to keep saying? The wrench size is not the bolt size. So if you have a 1/2-inch wrench in your hand, is that a 1/2-inch bolt? No. So since you're working in groups of 4, take advantage of that before you go to torque something. Hey, I'm torquing this to 300 inch-pounds. And the guy goes, no, where'd you get that number from? Well, it's a 1/2 inch, right? So double check with somebody. Everybody should be watching everybody else. Everybody should be involved in every project. Good corrosion prevention. We are in a heated room. Things don't corrode too bad, but this time of year, parts can corrode very rapidly. You're going to be using the hot seat pressure washer. If you leave something nitrided in there, like a crankshaft, you can expect that if you leave it in overnight, come in the morning, it's going to look really bad. It's going to be rusted. Cylinders will rust overnight in there too. So take it out, dry it, make sure you follow directions. I want everything should look like a quality overhaul, something you should be proud of. Above and beyond just a get it done project. So last thing I want to hear from any of my engine mechanics was, well, I just got to get it done. Oh, that's not what the customer wants to hear. So we're not going to just get it done. So, and use your time well. Try and be as clean as you can. Use the manuals properly. Protect your parts. I think I wrote that a couple times. And that's where we are. And still, my PowerPoint has not loaded. I don't know what's going on with that. But we can just carry on. So what kind of engine you guys have? Lycoming 0290. What model? D. We'll talk about that in a little bit. What's a D? Different versions. What's that? Dual magnetos. Dual magnetos meaning 2, not a dual magneto meaning 1. It's 2 singles, not 1 dual. All right. So here we go. Wish my PowerPoint would have worked. KDS. Why are you in here so early? So I could open my PowerPoint, which didn't open. All right. So we need to start at the beginning, which is the basic theory of engines. Basic theory of engines. Oh, and this reminds me. I do have some bad news. 309 people, they won't know anything about this. I will no longer guarantee that we're going to have tests on Friday. If I get Wednesday or Thursday, I'll know. But if I still need to lecture Friday, I'm going to go through Friday, and then you can take the test when you come in on Monday. So we'll just come in. Yeah, I know, it sucks, huh?
So like what we were talking about.
Yep. If I need it. If I need it, that's where we're going. So, all right, basic theory. A reciprocating engine. What is a reciprocating, first of all? Reciprocating. What does the word reciprocating mean? Back and forth. Means back and forth. So what part of the engine goes back and forth? The piston does. All right, so we're going to cover all these little things, but a reciprocating, so a piston reciprocating back and forth. We'll write it here, back and forth. Back and forth. So the piston, that's the thing that is going now reciprocating. It's going back and forth. So we call it a reciprocating engine, back and forth. Reciprocating engine is known as a heat engine. Why is it a heat engine? Because it gets hot. Because it utilizes heat from fuel to produce power. Because it utilizes or uses, uses easier word, uses heat from fuel or burning fuel to produce power. So what happens is, and a lot of people kind of get this wrong, is they think you put fuel inside of a cylinder and you close some valves and then you light a spark and it explodes. And exploding fuel is very, very bad. We call that detonation. So we're going to talk a lot about detonation, but we do not want the fuel to explode. We want it to burn in a nice, even, and steady burn over time, which the fuel burns, and then it creates heat, and the heat causes the gases, it expands, it also causes the gases around it to expand, and it gives a nice push. I want to say gentle push, it's probably not very gentle, against the piston and down. As where we talk about detonation, detonation is an explosion, and it's when the fuel and air actually does explode, and it just hammers the piston. So it's like the difference between me trying to push this table over that way by getting next to it and then give a nice steady push and going, or getting a 20-pound sledgehammer and just trying to go in one shot. Which do you think the table would appreciate more? So yeah, so if you have an explosion that hits the piston like it's a sledgehammer, not only does it damage the piston, but it also damages the bearings, it damages the crankshaft, and detonation, which is what you get, can actually destroy an aircraft engine in a matter of seconds. It can actually burn a hole right through the piston. So that's bad, but uses heat from burning fuel to produce power. Yeah.
Well, that mostly because it's the combination of fuel plus oxygen and then the ignition, and then if it's not properly mixed right, that's where you get the impact.
It's not the properly mixed; it's at the wrong time, wrong conditions.
Okay, yeah.
So we'll cover all that a lot more in the next class. Uses heat to expand gases and create pressure, create pressure on a piston, in a cylinder. So the piston is the part that's going to go back and forth, and the cylinder is the thing around it. All right, so, well, I kind of already said this, but if I don't say it again, my outline will be off and you'll yell at me. Reciprocating. It turns. Reciprocating. Reciprocating back and forth into rotary motion. What's rotary? Rotation. So what's going back and forth? The piston. And what's going round and round? Crankshaft. And the crankshaft is then attached to propeller, and there we go. Or reduction gear, and then the propeller. All right, so we talk about recip engines. We often just abbreviate it recip, R-E-C-I-P, recip. we can categorize the recip engines into all different kinds. I'm going to just resume. So a lot of these pictures, well, a lot of these pictures are actually taken by me when I was at Lycoming School in Pennsylvania, which was a lot of fun. Don't forget about your Canvas quizzes. Everybody knows about Canvas quizzes? I did them in 309. Everybody second year and beyond, they're used to it. But for those of you who haven't had, who took 309 in the summer? Well, you've been in the program now. So who's new from summer? Okay, so do you guys understand the Canvas quizzes? So go into Canvas. There's one quiz already due, which is the introduction, and then there's another one now that is going to be the Q&A test. All right, so our Lycoming 0290D, just kind of backing up just a little bit, this actually came from the type certificate data sheet. And that's a new word for some of you, but when a product is created, engines, propellers, and airframes, just those three, the FAA issues a type certificate data sheet. And what this type certificate data sheet does is it describes the product. So like a Cessna 150 has a type certificate data sheet. If I were to read that, it would say, well, this is a Cessna 150 M model, and it has this serial number to this serial number, and it must have this specific engine. And that engine may have one of these three propellers, and it must have these wheels and brakes, and the seat is located at this station, and it has X number of gallons located at this spot. So it has all the stuff about the aircraft. They do the same thing for engines and propellers, so we're looking at a page right here out of the Lycoming 0290D manual. And unfortunately, I forgot to change my slide, so I know if you're looking beyond this line right here, you can't actually see everything. But if we look at the 0290D, I'm just going to fix it, I'm sorry. If we move this over here, then it's seeable. There we go. All right, so if we look at this, this actually is out of the type certificate data sheet, number Echo 229, and we look right here and we can see the different type. They make a model 0290D. There's a D2, a D2A, a D2B, a D2C. There may be more. I just copied this right here. But it talks about certain things. Do you have a D model? How do you know you have a D model?
Well,
it's in the logbook. How do I know that? I told the students to write that. How do I know that? It says on the oil sump. You have an oil sump? No, see, I have to take my word for it. All right, so how many horsepower? 229 horsepower. FAA Type 229 has 130 horsepower. Maximum RPM, tells me right there, 2,800. Rated horsepower, 125 at 2,600. So it's got a takeoff horsepower and a maximum horsepower. So it's maximum sustained, and then you can go just take off for a little while. The bore is how the diameter of the cylinders. That's the bore, 4.875 inches. The stroke, that's how far the piston goes up and down. That is 3.875 inches. A cubic inch displacement, displacement is if I poured a liquid in the cylinders and then ran the piston from the bottom all the way to the top, how much liquid comes out. So it's how much liquid it displaces when it goes up. And it has a displacement of 289. If I round that up to the nearest tenth, what number is that? That's where they get the number. All right, compression ratio, we'll talk about that, 6.5 to 1. Propeller ratio 1 to 1 just means the prop is really mounted to the end. And let's see, it turns clockwise. Clockwise from whose perspective?
From the rear.
It's always from the rear of the engine. How do we know that? Because it says it right there.
I don't think we did talk about compression ratio.
Huh?
You said something about compression ratio.
We're going to talk about later.
Oh.
So when viewed from the rear, not the pilot's perspective, because sometimes these engines are mounted behind and they're a pusher. Sometimes they're in front, they're a tractor. So it's not pilot's perspective, it's when viewed from the back of the engine, as it says right there. Firing order means cylinder number 1 is going to fire, then 3, then 2, then 4. Nice thing is all 4 cylinders in aviation that I'm aware of, Continental and Lycoming, it's the same. So 1, 3, 2, 4. Spark occurs at 25 degrees before top dead center. It's got a valve rocker clearance of 7 to 9 thousandths. Hey, it doesn't have anything right here. That means because it has it up here, These are different. They have hydraulic tappets, which we'll talk about later. So, all right. Overhaul time frames. It's a pretty engine. Okay. Back to where we were.
Is that why you took the picture?
Because it's pretty, yep.
I'm glad.
I want that. Okay. Reciprocating. All right, so I was saying, inside this reciprocating world, we can then lump engines into a type of operating type. Then we can lump them into another type of arrangement type. So first thing we look at is several different types. Several different types of reciprocating engines. I'm just going to abbreviate recip, and then you have to ask me, what am I going to do with all the time I saved by abbreviating recip? And I will say, SeaWorld. Several different types of recip engines. Who are my Office fans?
That would be mostly.
Did you guys notice that Hannah from last class was wearing a Schrute Farms cap? It's pretty sweet. Okay.
I didn't notice that.
Several different types of recip engines. First thing can be defined by operating principle. Defined by operating principle. And what I mean by that is what is their design function? The person who designed it, how did they figure out how to make it work to produce power? And that can be defined, first thing is stroke. So there's an engine called a two-stroke. And that means that every time the piston, it can do the entire job in two strokes, which is one and down. So and we'll get more into that. So you can have a two-stroke, which means that it fires pretty much every time the piston comes up, it's firing. Every time it goes down, it's on a power stroke. And we'll come back. Then there's the four-stroke, which is more common, especially nowadays, also called the Otto cycle, named after the famous Dr. Albert Cycle. Never gets old. Named after Otto von something.
Liechtenstein?
There's the Wankel, not wanker, but Wankel, because I think wanker means something different. Wankel. Anybody know what a Wankel engine is? Yeah, which car manufacturer was famous for the Wankel? Mazda. Okay, it's called a rotary. And I'll show you all pictures and how that worked, but it's called a rotary, which we call it a Wankel. O-R-Y, rotary. I think it has two O's, rotary. All right, but then they also have an engine called, and I'm going to call it the Gnome radial, G-N-O-M, Gnome radial, which is also called a rotary. So somebody says, dude, it had a rotary engine on it. I'll say, what kind, Wankel or Gnome? No, Wankel is more appropriate to say Gnome. Gnome is a type of radial. But then we could also have maybe the fuel type, like diesel, which is also called compression ignition. Compression ignition, I just threw it in there. Diesel engines don't use spark plugs. They can be two-stroke or four-stroke, but they rely on the heat of compression to ignite the diesel fuel. And by the way, diesel fuel is very similar to jet fuel. All right, so we can define it in those operating principles like that. We could also define by the cylinder arrangement, especially in aviation, by cylinder. Cylinder arrangement. Okay, so cylinder arrangement. Well, we do the same thing in cars. What do cars have? You got your inline 4s and 6s are common.
Yeah.
A V6, a V8, Pancake 4. What am I missing? A what? The W12 Volkswagen.
Flatheads.
Flathead is actually more of the style of the the head itself, not the cylinder arrangement.
Narrow
So-
angle VSIG.
Huh?
Narrow angle VSIG.
The angles, you have narrow angle, wide angle. So but in aircraft we have the most common, especially in the recip world nowadays, is the opposed. The opposed. So now I know I have my pictures there. Okay, so there we are. Okay, so we have the opposed, which means a bank of cylinders on one side, bank of cylinders on the other side. If this is a car, what car would it go into? Subaru, then would it be called there? Or
Corvair.
Or Corvair?
Corvair.
Or,
Day.
no, wait a minute. Didn't Corvair use a Franklin engine though?
I don't know. I just know that were 6 cylinders and they were.
Yeah, I want to say it was a Franklin engine, which it was really an aircraft engine to start.
Oh.
That could be a little bit wrong on that. Okay, so what do we call these when they go into a Porsche? Boxer engines. Right? You know why? Well, it's interesting because if you have a force, the pistons are actually opposing, the ones that are opposed, they go out like this, and the other ones are coming in. So it's a boxer going like this, right? No. If you look at it sideways, it's going like that. Because if you fight like this, I might have an easier class. So this is opposed. This is an opposed 6-cylinder. Have 1, 2, 3 cylinders right here, all nice and shiny and chrome. We have 1, 2, 3 on the other side. Notice that, I can't see with this picture, but this cylinder is not in line with the other one. It's like this one cylinder goes here and one there, so they're offset when you go through there. All right, so we have opposed. What's this one called? This is a radial engine. I'll write this down for you. So you can enjoy the picture. That's a radial engine. Radial engines have, this is a single row, which means it's just got one row going here. If it was a double row, it'd have another row behind it. The rows are always odd numbers, never even. Must always be odd. Why? Because when they fire, it goes 1, 3, 5, 7, 9, 2, 4, 6, 8. And so it skips every other one all the way around. If it was even and it went 1, 3, 5, 7, 9, well, it wouldn't go 1, 3, 5, 7, 8, it would be off. So just trust me on that. So this is a radial. So almost all aircraft engines turn to the right. Right.
That's why you have left turning tendencies.
Yeah. All of our American engines. If you go, the other side of the equator, they go different. No, it's not true. But American engines do, in fact, turn to the right. But which way is this one turning? This is the leading edge of the propeller, so it's going to come down this way. So which way does it turn? It turns to the... No, it's from whose perspective? From the back. So this one's going this way. From the mechanic's perspective, it goes left, but from the right, from looking at it correctly, it's still a right-hand engine. They're almost all right, okay? All right, what kind is this then?
Let's see, inline, inverted.
Inline, look at 1, 2, 3. They got 6 cylinders down here, inline. But what's wrong with my inline engine right here? It's upside down. So they would never do this with the car. They would put the cylinders up here. But on an aircraft engine, they put them upside down. Talk about that later. So there's an inline. What do we got here? This one actually I think I stole off the internet, but it was still taken at the museum across the street. Well, here's a bank and here's a bank over there. So this is a what? V. And I think I've got, oh, look at that. 1, 2, 3, 4 banks. There's our W. So it makes a W. And I think that was, all right, so we'll come back to that. Alt tab. Let's see, we go up here. So we have opposed, all right, which is the most common. We have the radial, which went around. We have the inline. We have the V, which is just the cylinder arrangements or actually make a giant V. And we have we can even have the W. And that particular one I showed you was an out. It's actually looks more like 2 V's put together, if you ask me. That's not a W. I don't know what that is. That's really what that one is.
Were they side by side?
Yeah, it's 2 Allison V12s mounted. So the W. Okay, so we've kind of got the arrangement. So when I talk about it, you can at least picture, hey, that's what he's talking about. But let's we'll circle back around a little bit. Let's talk about really what makes them work. How does it work? All right, knowing just a little bit about them. So talk about theory of operation. Theory of operation. All right, let's talk about the most common one, the one that you have over in lab. Once you understand this one, you can kind of just modify it a little bit for everything else. But this is the Otto 4-stroke. Sometimes it can be called the Otto cycle, or it can just be called a 4-stroke. Who are my boating people in here who like outboards? All right, so outboard engines forever were 2-stroke. And then it became illegal in California to even operate a 2-stroke on our waterways. I think you can still use them on the Delta, but that's it. I'm not even sure. So now they're all 4-stroke. So, you know, we start there. Why did we go from 2-stroke to 4-stroke? Who has a 2-stroke motorcycle? They're the best, aren't they? Yeah.
Power band.
Oh man, it's because you get power every time the piston comes down as a power stroke. Well, 4-stroke, it doesn't do that. It's got to bring in the fuel and air mixture, and then it's got to compress it. Then the spark plug goes off. Then it's got a power stroke. Then it's got to push it up and get rid of it. So it's every other time you get a power. So, but they're cleaner, more environmentally friendly, just not as fun. All right, so let's talk about some terms. Terms. What kind of terms do we got? Oh yeah, we do this.
I gotta show you the Craigslist ad that this guy had for it was like a CD 500 or what's it was like a 2-stroke 500 Honda that they like eventually pretty much made illegal because they're so fast.
Oh, dude, yeah.
It's hilarious.
All right, terms. Let's talk about this. I threw out some, but we're going to circle. Okay, a stroke. What is a stroke? That's what I will have when you damage the engine in there.
I was gonna say after too much coffee.
Yes, I would have a stroke. Okay, it is the distance. The distance a piston travels through the cylinder. We might as well get this out of the way. Let's talk about the piston cup, Katie.
You did what in your cup?
Thank you. From Cars. One of the best lines in there.
What would you do, Zach? It's not coffee.
Now, see, but the red race car, who's a
Lightning
Lightning McQueen. There's some is talking about the piston cup, and then Mater says, "You did what in your cup?" Okay. All right. Okay, stroke is the distance of travel through the cylinder, and then for each stroke, the crankshaft and what is the crankshaft? We're going to go part by part through the engine, but I don't want you to, if you don't know, go, what's the crankshaft? I know crankshaft. Crankshaft is the spinny part that the propeller attaches to. And in your case, it is the spinny part that you bolted to your stand today. So that's that thing sticking out of the middle that spins. That's the crankshaft. And let me see if we got a picture of the crankshaft here. Yeah, we're just going to do this. Why not? We're here. Let's pull this up. Come on. Well, I would have liked it if I could have clicked on that. There we go. I love this little website here. All right, you guys all see that? And let's see. You got to work for me. No, oh, it's still loading. Anyway, the crankshaft is this right down here. So that is the part that is going to rotate around, and the crankshaft has throws on it, and the throws are going to be attached to the piston. Go back here, maybe that'll load. I don't know. Looking for a picture. Wow. Nope. All right. That looks like fun. But I don't want that. I want this. And I wanted it to work. It used to have an animation And I don't know why it doesn't anymore. That's very sad.
No, we're not refreshing.
Well, it's doing something right there.
They just.
There we go. All right, so if we slow this way down, way down. When we talk about the four-stroke engine, there are, and I'm going to write this down later, there are 4 strokes and 5 events. 4 strokes. So I always start, when we talk about the strokes, we always talk about the stroke that starts intake. That's kind of the beginning. So I'll wait a second here, and I'll say, okay, here's the intake stroke. So ready, set. All right, now we're on the intake stroke. How do I know it's the intake stroke? And I stopped it because if I look up here in this area, what I've got are 2 valves. I have an intake valve and an exhaust valve and a spark plug. And so the crankshaft, this part, is coming down, and it is creating a suction, like a big syringe. And this intake valve has opened up, and now it's drawing in fuel and air. All right, so you can draw, so that's stroke 1 is intake, drawing in the fuel and air, and gets to the bottom. Now, where I started this was, I was writing down through every 90 degrees of the crankshaft is a stroke. So notice this crankshaft, it was up here. Now it came down here. It's 90 degrees, right? That way. 90 degrees of rotation. Rotated 90, 1 stroke.
Isn't that
180, I'm sorry, 180. Thank you. I kept thinking, that's all right. 90's from here to here. So 1 stroke, 180 degrees. That's what I wrote. Good thing. Okay, just not saying it right. So 1 stroke, 180 degrees. So now, first stroke, intake. What's next? Okay, it's going to be compression. So the intake valve is going to close, and the piston's going to compress this fuel air mixture. And there it did. So the crankshaft just moved through 180 degrees because it's 180 degrees per stroke. And now in this animation, it's the spark plugs are going to go here. We'll talk about why that's not exactly right. But okay, so we had intake, now we had compression, the ignition. So I said there's 4 strokes, 5 events. So intake, compression, ignition. That's an event, not a stroke. And then it's going to be power. So now the fuel and air is expanding and pushing the piston. That's the only place to get power. So I had 1 stroke, and the crankshaft went how many degrees? 180. Okay, last one is it's going to come up, and that is exhaust. It's going to push all that nasty, yucky gas out. So the intake, compression, power, exhaust. How many times did it go around? Twice. How many degrees is that? 720. So in 720 degrees of crankshaft rotation on a 4-stroke Otto cycle, everything happened. All right? Now, maybe this is a 2-cylinder. Well, if you had another cylinder attached down here to the bottom, guess what? It's not doing the same thing, but it's usually doing the opposite. So, but how many times does a crankshaft have to go around for this cylinder down here to do everything? Twice. How many times do you go around here to do everything? Twice. Okay, so the crankshaft goes around twice. Both cylinders pretty much did everything, right? And that's the way it is. I could add 1,000 cylinders to this, and how many times does the crankshaft have to go around to make all 1,000 cylinders do their thing? Twice. So it doesn't matter if it's 1, 2, 4, 100, 1,000 cylinders. That's ridiculous. But if you get the point, how many times does the crankshaft go around for all of the cylinders to fire? Twice. Never changes. But I'll ask you that, especially next semester. All right, so this is a 4-cylinder engine. How many times do I have to go around to fire all cylinders? You'd be like, twice. Okay, what if it was a 6-cylinder? What's the answer?
Twice.
Okay, doesn't change. So, all right. Let's see. For each stroke, the crankshaft. Oh, I didn't write it yet. The crankshaft travels 180 degrees. Therefore, the crankshaft, often called just the crankshaft rotates 720 degrees to complete all cycles. Or one, it should be, I guess, one cycle, all strokes. Let me change that. For all strokes or 1 cycle. That sounds better. All right. When the piston is all the way up, all the way up, it is called top dead center, or just TDC, top dead center. So when you see TDC. Now this is a very important point, and I'm going to show you why, hopefully, if I just go, oops, I think I can just slide this little guy 1 frame. There we go. Well, this doesn't do a good job of showing it, but if I just go 1 frame, 1 frame. All right, what happened in this animation in 1 frame is the piston actually moved down a little bit. Well, in reality, when you look at an engine and what's really happening, because of the way this crankshaft is kind of at the top of its throw right there, it actually rotates a little bit, several degrees, and the piston never actually moves. I mean, it moves microscopically, but it almost stays the same place. So if the crankshaft is this way a little bit, it's really not top dead center. It's offside. So top dead center really means that the crankshaft throw, that's this part here, is perfectly in line going straight up. It's as far up as the piston can get, and the crankshaft is actually aligned so that it is. So once the crankshaft comes off a little bit, it's no longer at top dead center. And something to think about with that, if I were to push on the piston right now, push very hard, hit it with a sledgehammer, do anything, what would the crankshaft want to do? I stop it right here and I say, you got to go. So I take a hammer and I whack, and I beat it right here. Which way is it going to go?
Just nowhere.
It's just going to break because it's locked in place. And so all the forces are going to go straight down through this thing. It's connecting rod. The connecting rod has bearings. It's going to smash the bearings there, transfer that force to the crankshaft, and smash it into its own bearings there. So it's really bad for it. So you really want the pressure to start on the cylinder right there. Now if I hit it or pressed on it or even put compressed air in there, which way is the piston going to go? It'll go down and it'll start making the crankshaft go the right way, and everything's happy. So, all right, so that's top dead center, and the opposite is bottom dead center. Top dead center. So that's the difference between up at the top and top dead center. That's why they say top dead center, meaning that crankshaft is lined up. Otherwise, it's just at the top of its stroke somewhere. Do you have a question?
Yeah.
Yeah, what?
But when you hit the position, the piston on the top dead center is actually crankshaft.
It's supposed to be aligned perfectly.
Okay. How do you see that though?
When you're building up the engine, it's really kind of hard to do, and so it doesn't usually matter. You can be off for a few degrees when you're building it up, but when you're timing it and putting the ignition together, then you have to know exactly the degree, the perfect degree that it's at. And you do that, well, I'll show you how in another class, but you do it by finding the piston in a different area because it's too hard to tell at the top. All right, so when the piston is all the way down, when the piston is all the way down, it is called bottom dead center, or BDC for short. All right, then I told you we have the strokes. How many strokes do we have? 4 strokes. 4 strokes. 1. First stroke. Always start here. Intake. Intake. That is the piston starts at TDC. The intake valve is open. And it ends. Where does it end? And on BDC. Now what I'm going to explain to you a little bit here, first we're going to look at a very basic engine which matches the model of what we were just looking at, that little animation. Then we're going to modify it to what is reality, because some things are just like this and some things are a little different. And what is different is where the valves really open and really close. In a very simplistic model, we pretend like the valve just suddenly opens on the intake and suddenly closes at bottom dead center. And then we have the compression, and then the ignition and power, ignition at the top, and then the power stroke. But it doesn't really work that way. Things happen at different times because the engine is moving so fast. You actually have to start things ahead of time, or you lose a lot of power. So then what's the next one? Compression. Compression. So it's going to then start on bottom dead center. Both valves are closed. Both valves are closed. This is where the spark plug fires. Spark plug fires. That's what's going to light off the fuel air mixture, and it ends. Where does it end? Top dead center. So keep in mind that this one ends over here on bottom dead center. This one starts on bottom dead center. So if it's on bottom dead center, can I ask you what stroke it's on? Not really. You'd have to say, well, it just finished this and it's starting that. You can't say, well, it's clearly on compression because it's bottom dead center. No, well, it's clearly not. It's right in between the two. So, all right, compression. What comes next? Power. So we're doing the strokes. We're doing the strokes. I do have spark plug fires right here, which is one of the events. That's an event. But we're doing the strokes. So remember, 4 strokes, 5 events. So power. Power starts on top dead center. Both valves are closed. Both valves are closed. And then it ends, of course, ends on bottom dead center. I'm going to throw out a few other little things here just to note. So the pressure in the cylinder is greatest just after top dead center. Which makes sense. The pressure is going to diminish as it pushes the piston down and uses up that work energy. And most gas, that's your fuel and air. Most gases are burned just after top dead center, about 14 degrees. Let's see, by about 14 degrees after top dead center. ATDC means after top dead center. What would BTDC mean? There you go. Before, and if I'm scrolling too fast, it's your job to say something. Everybody's good? Janet, you're fine?
Yeah.
All right. You got finger cramps yet?
Oh yeah, this was last week.
You guys cramp. I'm writing it too. Difference is you have to read your writing. Okay, what comes after power? Nothing comes after power because that's the ultimate. All right, exhaust. So exhaust.
What does that say again? Number 4, pressure.
Number 4, pressure is the greatest just after top dead center. So if I had a pressure gauge in the cylinder, and I'm looking at the pressure in the cylinder, I would see it reach its peak right after top dead center going down a compression. So come up, it's going to build up, and then that's the most.
I have a question.
And what's that?
I have a question.
Yeah.
About what is ATDC?
After top dead center. I looked right at you when I said it. So what is BTDC? What does this mean?
Before.
BTDC.
Before.
Before top dead center. All right. By the way, and I'll just kind of talk to you about this, so while some of you are catching up. So obviously inside of a cylinder, if I took a cylinder and I put a big pressure gauge and I watched it, it's going to fluctuate dramatically. So intake, I'm going to see a vacuum. And then, because it's sucking in, right? It's got a low pressure. Then as the piston starts to come up on compression, I'm going to see it climb. And then I'm going to see the spark go off and the fuel burn. I'm going to see it peak way over, and then the pressure is going to push the cylinder back. I'm going to start seeing it come drop, and then I'm going to see it come up a little bit probably as the exhaust starts pushing some gas out. But then the intake valve is going to open. I see a suction, and that gauge is going to be going like this back and forth. And as opposed to a turbine engine, which is the Brayton cycle, which Phil is going to fill in, a Brayton cycle is also often called a constant pressure engine, because if you take a pressure gauge and spike it anywhere you want in that turbine engine, as long as it's running the same RPM, every gauge is perfectly still. It never moves. Because what's happening right in this spot in the turbine engine is always that pressure. So you have one of your stages of compression, it's always that pressure. You get to the burner can, it's always this one. You get to the turbine section, it's always that pressure. Never changes, is where, over here in the recip, it's good luck trying to look at that. So where does my exhaust start on? Starts on BDC. What's that stand for, Janet? She's got it. All right. Exhaust valve opens. That's what you get for sitting in front of me. She won't tomorrow. I'll stop asking. Okay. Exhaust valve opens, or it is open, and 3 and ends on top dead center. What happens next? Intake happens. Well, should we start that? Write that down? May I just scroll to the top and make you write it? All right. All right, now we're going to talk about efficiency. But first, a word from your sponsors.